You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Here now with information, new information, Fox News contributor, investigative reporter Sara Carter, also Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. All right, let's try and break this down. I talked to a very good friend of mine today, Sara, really smart guy. My best friend from third grade, John Gomez. He's a lawyer in his own right, and he says this is hard for him to follow every night, and we're trying to, lay the foundation, bring the new information in, and try and make it explainable, because the level of corruption is so deep, it's hard to follow every single aspect of this.
It is. But if you just lay out the facts, Sean, here you have the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC paying for a dossier that is being gathered by a foreign agent, a British foreign agent. That British foreign agent is using Russians to gather information. Then you have members of the Hillary Clinton campaign, people that were close to her and her husband, actually gathering their own separate dossier and then feeding that information to the British foreign agent who's trying to get the FBI to open an investigation into then candidate Trump and then President-elect Trump. It's really quite simple, and it's as simple as that. And for people who were so afraid of the Russians, for people who were so terrified in those last years of Russian interfering in the election, they had no problem accepting information from Russian FSB agents, former KGB agents, disinformation that was never verified, and then lying to the FISC court about this. And I'm going to tell you this, one of the things they'll discover in those FISC court applications is the fact that even the FBI never, it wasn't just a footnote, they never admitted that they actually knew. They only speculated that it might be political. They only speculated.
It was
mark my words on that. It was a footnote.
But that's a purposeful deception and omission to the FISA court. That is beyond material. That would have been a game changer for any fair judge.
That's right, and it was deceptive. It was deceptive even in its own footnote statement. Wouldn't it have been easier to just go to the judge and say, look, we know that the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee were paying for this dossier? That would have been a lot easier than trying to bury it in a footnote. And so, in fact, that footnote was very deceptive in itself, because that footnote did not directly state that the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC paid for that document.
So you got, Greg, you got Clinton hit people, known hit people, literally, making up information, feeding it all to Steele. Steele is, we learned in the unredacted Grassley-Graham memo that, in fact, the information they got, it's the bulk of the FISA, it's unverified. They don't tell the FISA judge where it comes from. So you got basically everybody feeding this big lying narrative to each other, and then they lie before a judge and they get a warrant. Okay, and it's all designed to impact a presidential election. And they did it successfully in some ways. They got the warrant.
Sure, and I was just reading the declassified opinion of the Chief Judge of the FISA court. It was declassified 9 months ago. It's 99 pages long. And what it tells me is that the Department of Justice and the FBI knew they could get away with it, because this judge points out repeated acts of incomplete and misleading filings before the FISA court. So the FBI and the Department of Justice likely knew that they could go into that judge, the first one and then 3 thereafter, and conceal evidence and deceive the judge, and the judge probably wouldn't know any better because they'd gotten away with it so many times before. So they use all of this information that's paid for and now we're learning put together in part by the Clintons and their allies. And the Department of Justice and the FBI knew, this stuff was all fabricated. Look at the dossier. It's a joke. But they sort of hid that from the judge, and they used it as a pretext to go after and destroy Donald Trump. And it's an American tragedy.
Let me stay on this. And Sara, you and John, May 25th last year, you were on this program talking about it, how the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court blasted, literally ripped to shreds the Obama administration for breaking not only America's surveillance laws, but blatantly violating the Constitution. Those aren't my words. Those are the judge's words.
Those were the judge's words. That came from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. They did blast them, Sean. They said that they stepped all over the Fourth Amendment. They were conducting warrantless searches. They knew that. They knew that they were violating the rules and regulations. And they said, look, the FBI cannot self-regulate. It can't watch itself. There needs to be changes. There were a lot of things that did change, but a lot of things that haven't changed, as we've seen. And I think that this calls for further investigation. I know that the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Committee is also looking into this, the Judiciary and others. They're going to look at what happened with our intelligence apparatus and whether or not that was weaponized against our own people. And I think Carter Page is just one example of many.
We need to, Greg, get to the crimes that potentially are committed here. I mean, misrepresenting information to a court is bad enough, but it suggested in the Grassley-Graham unredacted memo that they had actually seen all 4 FISA warrant applications. So I'm assuming Charles Grassley and Lindsey Graham saw them. So they are available in some capacity, as Devin Nunes, I believe, is asking for this information tonight.
Right, and they have probably already identified the felony statutes that were likely broken by the FBI and the Department of Justice, their abuse of power and perjury. What'll be critical is, as you reported, and actually we talked about it 2 nights ago, is that Nunes is now requesting the presiding judge to provide the transcripts of all 4 of those FISA hearings, to get to the bottom of the false representations, the fraud upon the court that was perpetrated during those hearings. And if those transcripts provide that evidence, then charges must be brought against officials at the Department of Justice and FBI.
Wouldn't it but if the FBI and James Comey knew, if he knew that he was, that footnote that it may have political origins, and they know darn well it was bought and paid for by Hillary, and if they even knew on top of it that Hillary aides were feeding this, and remember, go back to the Grassley-Graham unredacted. They're saying this is Russian government lies. They said government, right. The Russian government, in that Christopher Steele is putting in that information. Yeah, I mean, it's the irony in all of this is insane. Just like the irony of Uranium One is that we're giving Russia 20% of our uranium. We've heard a year about Russia, and now we have real evidence.
Any intelligent lawyer, and Comey is certainly a veteran lawyer, would know that you can't rely on evidence that comes from a source in Russia or sources in Russia who are experts on lying and deception and disinformation. Nor can you rely on a former spy in Great Britain who's trained in the same thing. And then you factor in that it was political research paid for by the opponent of the target. I mean, you can't make up such deception and fraud if you tried.
How could you ever present what the Grassley-Graham memo was saying, Sarah? Unverified Russian government information that Hillary paid for to get a warrant to spy on an opposition party.
Well, the Grassley and Graham memo basically substantiated everything that Nunes was saying in his own memo. And it went further, and it went further. It implicated them in criminal acts, and this is why they want to speak to Christopher Steele. This is the reason why they want more information. And I tell you this, Sean, in March, when the IG report comes out, and hopefully we've been hearing it's going to be the first weeks of March or by mid-March, I think it's going to be an explosion of information that we didn't even know. The focus on Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, former deputy director of the FBI, all of the other things that come into play with the Clinton server investigation. Those things will be so relevant, and they won't be able to dismiss those facts.
Because the fix was in, Sarah. The fix was in. It was rigged by Comey. It was rigged by Peter Strzok. What are the statute of limitations? I don't know if you know off the top of your head on the Clinton email server, considering the fix was in, Greg. That's important fact,
well,
I think.
some of the statutes are 5 years, so they may have run. Others have not run as yet. So on that basis alone, there ought to be a second special counsel appointed, reopen it, and quickly re-examine the evidence, send it to a grand jury, which is where it should have gone to begin with. Let a grand jury decide whether there's sufficient compelling evidence that Hillary Clinton committed a myriad of crimes. I guarantee you, if an honest grand jury looked at it, she would be indicted.
Unbelievable. I agree with you, too. All right, thank you both.